What timeline are we living in? Who would have thought that Donald Trump would one day be sitting across the table from Kim Jong-un to talk about possible denuclearization of the Korean peninsula? The South Korean National Security Director yesterday announced that Kim Jong-un has invited Donald Trump to meet him to talk about possible denuclearization and to negotiate some other things as well. In the meantime, he has agreed to cease all tests of ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. You do have to take this whole thing with a grain of salt, though. The North Koreans have been giving the United States the runaround for a very long time. They are known for making promises and not keeping them. In fact, the whole problem of this nuclear Korea started back in the Jimmy Carter days, back when Kim Il-sung was still the leader of North Korea. He had agreed to halt all nuclear developments, I believe it was in 1994, at the personal request of Jimmy Carter. And then in 2002, it was discovered that Kim Jong-il was actually continuing with that program and had been developing nuclear weapons under the radar for all that time. And then finally in 2006, he detonated his first nuclear weapon as a test. So the North Koreans have been known to make promises and obviously work in secrecy to not keep those same promises. So what happened in 2002 when we discovered that the Koreans were actually developing a nuclear arsenal? George W. Bush came out and he said, "Oh, the Americans, we can never allow this to happen. The North Koreans will be met with consequences if they do not stop their nuclearization." And of course, nothing happened. And the same thing carried on to the Obama administration. Nothing has been accomplished in terms of North Korea ever since Kim Il-sung died back in 1994 or the subsequent year, whatever it was. The whole problem has never really been dealt with. And Donald Trump has taken a different approach to it. He announced very early on in his presidency that the era of strategic patience was now over. And you see that now playing out. You see that the mainstream media has been attacking him incessantly over this new strategy. Anytime he says that North Korea will be met with fire and fury, or that the United States will completely take North Korea off the face of the earth if they continue to pursue aggressive policies towards the United States and its allies, anytime you see any of this, the media immediately attacks Donald Trump, say he's about to start World War III, say everything is going to turn into a nuclear holocaust. But this approach has seemed to work fairly well now, hasn't it? One thing you have to understand about Asian politics is the Asian culture itself. Asia greatly respects power, dominance, strength, and this is something that Donald Trump has been displaying, at least in public. When George Bush and Barack Obama sit around doing nothing and just throwing out empty words, the Asian countries tend to not respect that at all. They do not take the United States seriously, and they pursue their own policies regardless of what the United States threatens. You saw this with Obama's so-called pivot to Asia. He tried to paint himself as a foreign policy expert. He called it the pivot to Asia. And all the foreign policy analysts, all these academic journals on foreign policy, they're all kissing Obama's ass, saying how he was pivoting to Asia and he was a geopolitical master. But really nothing was accomplished from this so-called pivot. I don't think Obama accomplished anything at all in Asia. Perhaps the only thing that he did was try to develop the TPP, which Trump has thankfully dismantled by now. And then he also, sent a few striker groups towards the Spratly Islands, tried to posture a little bit in the South China Sea. But what happened instead was that he tried to portray this image of himself as a Pacific president, but had absolutely no actions to back that up. So what happened instead is that China was reading these words and assuming that the United States was going to become more aggressive in the region. So they themselves started posturing up militarily. They started developing their economy much more. You see things like the Belt and Road Initiative, in which China is really stepping up its game and trying to obtain hegemony in the region. So all these words encouraged China to beef up their own presence in the region. Meanwhile, the United States sat back and did nothing. But now we have Donald Trump, who is actually backing up what he is saying. He has shown the power. He has shown the respect. He has shown the strength from which he leads, and you see a definite change with how some of these Asian leaders are treating the United States. While Barack Obama was portrayed by the media as an Asian president, as a master of Asian politics, and accomplished absolutely nothing, the opposite is true for Donald Trump. They paint him as an ignorant man who does not understand geopolitics, who has nothing to gain in Asia, who is not paying attention to the region. Meanwhile, his actions say the very opposite. Donald Trump has the utmost respect of all the major leaders in the region. Modi in India, Abe in Japan, Moon Jae-in in South Korea, Xi Jinping in China. All of these leaders have shown much more respect towards the United States and cooperated with the United States in a lot of things. The alliance between Japan and the United States, the alliance between South Korea and the United States is stronger than ever. The leaders are crediting Donald Trump's interest in the region and his commitment to the region as a reason for this strength in the alliances. Modi and Trump themselves have strengthened that alliance, which is a very important alliance. If you really want to stop Chinese hegemony, the United States really should be working a lot closer with India, and Donald Trump certainly has taken that initiative. Modi seems to really like him, and a lot of the nationalist population in India seems to respect Donald Trump a lot. You see also China really trying to appease the United States much more than they have done so under the Bush and Obama years. Xi Jinping working directly with Donald Trump on a wide variety of issues, especially on North Korea. When we really put the center and focus on what we're talking about here, Donald Trump has managed to get China to work with the United States on containing the North Korean threat. Donald Trump really brought Xi Jinping on board with some of the sanctions, whereas the Chinese have really stopped taking a lot of coal shipments from North Korea. They have decreased their export of oil. They're really tightening the economic noose because North Korea is really dependent on some of these countries for its survival. They don't have much arable land in their country. It's a very mountainous place. So they really do need to import their food or else they will starve. You saw this with the famines in the 1990s when they got cut off from China and the Soviet Union, and they basically had millions of people dying of starvation. And this is magnified by their doctrine of Chuche, in which they try to practice self-reliance, but really they can't practice that because their land is not enough to have all the resources that they need in order to survive as a people. So they're completely dependent on foreign imports, especially from China. So the fact that Donald Trump has gotten Xi Jinping to cooperate in that issue really shows how much of an influence we are having in Asia, despite what you're hearing about in the news. But this really is a huge development. No American president has met with a North Korean head of state. So this is going to be a first, and it truly is exciting. I'm not getting my hopes up too much because things can always change. You've seen the North Koreans back out of deals multiple times in the past before they go on through. So it's one of those that I'm not really too excited about until it actually happens, but it's going to be ridiculous. This is going to be the event of the year for me. This is so exciting. Can you imagine seeing this? I don't know if they're going to allow camera access. I don't know if they're going to do photo ops, but it would just be so bizarre to see Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un sitting across from each other and negotiating. It's very exciting stuff. Now, we do have to take this with a grain of salt, like I said. It's not guaranteed that denuclearization is going to happen, but the very fact that Kim Jong-un is willing to have negotiations really shows that perhaps the sanctions are working. I've talked a lot about North Korea in the past, and perhaps I've made some wrong predictions, but it's hard to determine that until we see what actually these negotiations bring to the table. But I never really thought that sanctions would work. And the reason being that in order for sanctions to work, the outcome of those sanctions must be worse than what that state has to give up in order to get rid of the sanctions. So in this case, the sanctions have to put so much stress on the North Korean state that Kim Jong-un decides that giving up his nuclear arsenal is worth it. And at this current stage, his nuclear development is really what's keeping the state together. It's really justifying his authoritarian regime. It's gaining the respect that he is hoping to get during the past few years, during the transition of power from his father to himself. So perhaps now he has really established a strong foothold in North Korea. He has gotten rid of opposition through whatever means, and now he may feel comfortable enough with his authority and his power within the state to the point where he believes that giving up his nuclear arsenal may be worth it. Maybe the sanctions really are strangling the regime to the point of collapse. It's hard to know exactly how bad things are in North Korea. It's a very secretive state, so not much information gets out. The little information that does get out may be distorted. We really can't verify a lot of things, and our spying capabilities are certainly limited. A few months ago, I did a special report on North Korea, which I encourage you watch, and I predicted at the time that during our lifetime, we will see the end of the Kim regime. And I talked a lot about how their nuclear capabilities were certainly very limited, how they had really no delivery options for their nuclear arsenal, and how it could be decades even before they had the ability to strike the United States with nuclear weapons. And then as soon as I put that video out, I think weeks or maybe a month at most later, they were testing these intercontinental ballistic missiles with the capability of reaching the United States. More famously, the Hwasong-15 missile, which certainly has the potential to reach the east coast of the United States. And so what that tells me is that either our intelligence capabilities are completely limited because nobody had seen that coming, or that the intelligence agencies are certainly holding information from the American public. Either way, what that means is that it's hard to predict and hard to know exactly how much these sanctions are impacting the North Koreans. Whatever the case though, it is a very safe assumption to note that things must be bad enough that Kim Jong-un has swallowed his pride and extended a hand to Donald Trump for negotiations, with the possibility, at least he claims, of talking about permanent denuclearization. And what are we talking about when we say denuclearization? What we're talking about is giving up the glue that has been holding together this Korean regime. Since the passing of Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un has been working very hard to solidify his rule to make sure that there is no opposition that will attempt to remove him within North Korea. And the way he has done that is by strongmanning the rest of the world, by continuing to pursue these nuclear weapons. The way he seeks to justify his state and prevent external threats is to develop a system of mutually assured destruction. So it's a really big deal if he's willing to try and give this up. Now again, I'm not that optimistic that that's what it's going to come down to, but it certainly is a possibility, at least from what he is talking about. Things that make me have second thought is that I know that Kim Jong-un is not an irrational actor. He knows the power of having a nuclear arsenal. He knows what happened in Iraq. He knows what happened in Syria, what happened in Iraq. Remember all the talk about, oh, Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and we need to go in there, or he's going to kill all these civilians and he's going to deploy these weapons and cause worldwide outrage and humanitarian crisis left and right. And no weapons were ever found, but that was the main justification for the hellhole that we created in the Middle East. This whole past 20 years has been just a complete disaster in the Middle East, all built upon a lie about these weapons of mass destruction. What really the United States was interested in was regime change in Iraq. They wanted to get rid of Saddam Hussein, and the only thing that may have prevented that was a nuclear arsenal. What happened to Saddam Hussein? There's a video right now, you can go watch it, of him hanging. He was saying a prayer before they opened the trapdoors and they didn't even allow him to finish. They just opened that and boom, there he goes. He's dead, he's forgotten, and he's now irrelevant. What happened in Syria? The warmongers and globalists are trying to push a war in Syria, trying to say that they've been using weapons of mass destruction and chemical attacks, and Assad is using these weapons against his own people. And what happened? More disaster, more chaos, more attempts at regime change. What is the United States doing with Iran? They are saber-rattling. They have been doing this for the past decades, saying we must prevent Iran from developing a nuclear arsenal. It's all the same story. Weapons of mass destruction are used for regime change. And if a state does not have the capability of mutually assured destruction, they are at grave threat of regime change from the United States. I think Kim Jong-un understands this, so that's why I'm a little bit reluctant to accept the statement that he's going to give up his nuclear weapons. Because as soon as he does that, a conflict with North Korea is much less deadly and much more palatable for the American people. Any American administration will be able to much more easily justify a war with North Korea and regime change in the area if there are no weapons of mass destruction there. Kim Jong-un is not an idiot though, because something else that happened in Iraq and in Syria is that both of these leaders let people come into their states to examine their capabilities of weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein allowed people from the UN into Iraq to examine their nuclear reactors. They found nothing. Assad allowed a deal to be brokered by the Russians in which he would give up all his chemical weapons stockpile. Despite all of these attempts to de-arm and evidence that they de-armed, they still got their wars and they still got at least attempts at regime change in regards to Syria and full regime change when it comes to Iraq. So Kim Jong-un is certainly cognizant of this, and he knows that even if he agrees to denuclearize, there is a threat still that the United States will come in there and spread lies about how he is not fully committed to the principle and then go in there and commit regime change. So we'll see how all this plays out. I'm not crossing my fingers or anything. I won't believe the meeting until I see it. Apparently both sides have agreed to it and they hope to do it by May, but I won't believe it until I see it. It's also kind of fun to fantasize about what may happen. In the best case scenario, we have reunification and everybody lives happily ever after, and there's no more dictatorial regimes and there's no more starving North Koreans. And the worst case scenario is that this is all just an assassination plot. Could you imagine, just at the end of the meeting, as they're about to shake hands, Kim Jong-un unleashes a pistol that he had hidden underneath one of his fat rolls, and he blasts Donald Trump in the face, and soon thereafter, a bunch of guards attack Kim Jong-un and kill him, and then full-scale war breaks out? I'm just kidding, but obviously this is all pretty exciting, and I can't wait to see what happens.